Well, that's a great question, but a very difficult question. When you deal, I have to emphasize that when you deal with issues, especially in the financial sector, they're very complex, and it's difficult to summarize them or to try and put them down in simple terms. But nonetheless, I'll try to describe the various issues about the US dollar in very simple terms. The first point I would make is that the US dollar has been the global reserve currency, I think, for about 130 years or so, since the United States emerged as the number one power in the world in the 1890s. And I can confidently predict that the US dollar will remain the global reserve currency for at least another 2 or 3 decades. Why do I say that? Because it's very difficult to create an alternative to the US dollar. Now, traditionally, the currency of the world's largest power, remember before US it was the United Kingdom, then the British pound was the global reserve currency, and then it went to US dollar becoming the global reserve currency. So in the same way, when China becomes number one, right, in 10, 15 years, whenever, in theory, the renminbi should become the global reserve currency. But it will be very difficult because China doesn't allow what they call free flow of movement in the capital account. Now you'll have to go and look at your economics textbooks to find out what a capital account and so on and so forth. But anyway, at the end of the day, because of that constraint, the renminbi is not going to replace the US dollar anytime soon. And as a result of that, the United States will retain that leverage, and having the dollar as the global reserve currency gives tremendous power to the United States. So for example, I'll give you a very simple example. Many years ago, a French bank, and France is a friend of the United States, okay? Good friend of the United States. A French bank financed some trade between France and Iran. The United States was not involved. But because the trade between France and Iran was done through US dollars, that violated an American law. Because it violated an American law, the French bank had to pay a fine of $9 billion. The largest fine in human history. So you can see this. France and Iran didn't break any international laws, but France had to pay a fine of $9 billion to the United States. That's the power of the US dollar, okay? You can get a country like France to pay a big fine. That's power. And I don't see that diminishing anytime soon. But at the same time, I do think, and this is a fact, the United States has been weaponizing the US dollar. Again, to explain how weaponization means, I would encourage you to go and just Google and download a few articles. By weaponizing the US dollar, more and more countries want to reduce their trade dependence on the US dollar. So for example, now Saudi Arabia is prepared to sell oil to China, and instead of getting paid in US dollars, which the Saudis used to insist on, now Saudi Arabia says, I'll accept Chinese renminbi. And then of course that will progressively reduce the dependence on the US dollar. But the total amount of money used in global trade is a tiny fraction of the amount of money that's used in financial transactions. And therefore, even if the role of the US dollar in global trade goes down, the role of the US dollar in global financial transactions is not going down. And therefore, the de-dollarization is not going to happen anytime soon.
We are sorry to interrupt you. Before we move on to his next point about de-dollarization, we noticed that 98% of you are returning viewers who have not subscribed. If you've enjoyed our content, subscribing would mean the world to us. It's a small click for you, but it makes a huge difference for us. Thank you for your support.
The Chinese dream is about the prosperity of the country, the rejuvenation of the nation, and the happiness of the people. It reflects both the ideal of the Chinese people today and our time-honored tradition to seek constant progress. The Chinese dream will be realized through balanced development and mutual reinforcement of material and cultural progress. Without the continuation and development of civilization or the promotion and prosperity of culture, the Chinese dream will not come true. Unquote. And I think in those few sentences, he brilliantly captured what is the heart of the aspirations of the Chinese people, to move away from an era of having been humiliated for a long time to an era where they once again feel proud about Chinese civilization and what it can accomplish. And indeed, if the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, could change its name to CCP, the Chinese Civilization Party, then I think it would be a more accurate description of the goals and aspirations of the CCP. But of course, while this may be the motivations, many in the West continue to believe that China's approach is flawed because it is not changing its political system. And you can read in, whatever, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, The Economist, there's this constant belief that the best thing that can happen to China is to have a collapse of the Chinese Communist Party and have a democratic system. The one slightly provocative point I'm going to make here is be careful what you wish for. Because if the Chinese political system becomes more democratic, it could very well become far more nationalist and far more aggressive as a power. And the great paradox here is that the Chinese Communist Party is actually delivering a global public good by restraining Chinese nationalism. And if you didn't have a strong Chinese Communist Party in charge, you might actually get a more nationalist, a more assertive China. So I believe that it's actually in global interest to allow the Chinese Communist Party to evolve and change in its own way. And that way, I think we will have a China that focuses on economic growth and focuses on strengthening its civilization. Let me now turn to the second question I said I would discuss, which is US-China relations, because clearly the relationship between the world's number one power, which today is United States, and the world's number one emerging power, China, is a key dynamic. And here, it is actually remarkable how stable the US-China relationship is. In theory, when the world's number one emerging power is about to surpass the world's number one power, and as you know, in PPP terms, China did surpass the United States in 2014, you should be seeing naturally, logically, and I think Steve Walt might agree, rising levels of tension between US and China. But instead, quite remarkably, we're seeing a very stable and indeed a calm relationship. And of course, the question is why. And here I think we have to pay a lot of tribute to the United States for having managed very well the relationship with China. If indeed the United States has been remarkably benign over the years towards China, starting from the days of 1990s. I mean, of course, starting of course from the Cold War and Kissinger's trip and America's effort to bring China on board in the Cold War alliance against the Soviet Union, and then opening up the American market, as I mentioned earlier, to Chinese products. And even after the Tiananmen episode of 1989, when relations between US and China could have taken a nosedive, US-China relations continued in an even keel. Actually, I remember vividly in 1992 listening to the election speeches of Bill Clinton when he said famously in his campaign, "I will not coddle the butchers of Beijing if I become president of America." And when he became president, we could have very well seen a sharp nosedive in the relations between US and China. Instead, to my surprise, and I actually saw this in my own eyes, in November 1993, at the first APEC leaders meeting, which was held in Blake Island off Seattle, that's the first time that Bill Clinton and Jiang Zemin met face to face. And I could see that Jiang Zemin was incredibly uncomfortable, tense and nervous, and trying to figure out what the US president would do to him in this small, close meeting where I was present. And to Jiang Zemin's surprise, and to my surprise, Bill Clinton coddled the butcher of Beijing. And it was a very wise decision on his part. And by the end of the day, if you had watched the body language of Jiang Zemin and Bill Clinton, amazingly, they were almost good friends at the end of the day, reflecting the great charm of Bill Clinton at the time.
What do you guys think? Do you think the dollars can ever be replaced as world currency? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.